They're shouting about trends. They're chasing relevance. They're refreshing feeds, comparing timelines, measuring their lives and notifications, and then there's you, quietly watching, detached, maybe even amused. If all of that noise never fully made sense to you, this video is for you. Because psychology and neuroscience actually explain why Gen X often moves through the world differently. And no, that difference doesn't mean you're broken, or behind, or emotionally closed off. It means your brain was shaped in a very specific cultural moment. Let's talk about it. Gen X grew up in the space between worlds. You were raised before constant connectivity, but matured inside it. You remember life without algorithms deciding what mattered. You earned independence before digital validation became currency. You had boredom. You had silence. You had long stretches of unstructured time where you had to figure things out on your own. That matters more than most people realize. Psychologists call this a formative environment effect. The nervous system adapts to whatever emotional climate it grows up in. And for Gen X, that climate was often emotionally sparse, socially hands-off, and quietly demanding. Many of you were latchkey kids, both parents working. Minimal supervision. You learned early how to self-regulate, self-insert, and self-direct. Not because someone taught you, because you had to. And that built a very particular internal architecture. Here's where neuroscience enters the picture. Studies on dopamine and reward systems, especially work emerging in the late 1990s and early 2000s, show that brains wired in low stimulation environments develop a higher tolerance for boredom and delayed gratification. Translation: you don't need constant novelty to feel okay. Your baseline is steadier. You're less reactive to external reward loops. You don't instinctively reach for stimulation every time there's silence. That's not emotional coldness. That's nervous system resilience. Modern culture runs on rapid dopamine cycles, notifications, viral moments, identity reinforcement through visibility. But Gen X developed before those feedback systems existed. So your motivation system tends to be internally anchored instead of externally driven. You don't need to perform your life to feel like it's real. And if you've ever felt strange for that, you're not. You're just operating on a different psychological operating system. Now let's pause for something important. If you don't obsess over trends, status, or constant self-expression, that does not mean you're boring. It does not mean you lack ambition. It does not mean you're emotionally unavailable or socially detached. It simply means your brain allocates attention differently. You tend to conserve emotional energy. You prioritize autonomy over approval. You value consistency over visibility. That's not a flaw, that's a cognitive style. Psychologists sometimes describe Gen X as the compressed generation. You came after idealism and before hyperconnectivity. You absorbed economic uncertainty, cultural cynicism, and rapid technological change all at once. So you adapted by becoming pragmatic, observant, self-reliant. This is why many Gen X individuals appear emotionally contained. You learned early that stability comes from within, not from systems that might disappear. But here's the part people often misunderstand. That quietness isn't disengagement, it's calibration. Your emotional regulation system developed in an era where nobody asked how you felt every 5 minutes. So instead of external processing, you internalized. You learned to sit with discomfort. You learned to solve problems privately. You learned not to dramatize every feeling. Again, not suppression, adaptation. Now, let's reverse perspective for a moment. You might look at younger generations and think, why does everything have to be shared? Why is identity so public? Why does everyone need validation? But from a psychological standpoint, their behavior also makes sense. They grew up inside reward-driven ecosystems. Likes, follows, algorithms, all reinforcing visibility. Their brains learned early that connection comes through expression and safety comes through belonging to visible tribes. They're not shallow, they're responding to the environment that shaped them, just like you did. Every generation develops coping strategies based on what survival looked like during their formative years. For Gen X, survival meant emotional independence. For others, it means collective visibility. Neither is superior. They're just different adaptations. Where Gen X stands apart is identity formation. You tend to build identity through experience, not performance. Meaning comes from what you've lived, not what you've displayed. You don't feel pressure to constantly marry your life. You don't need an audience to validate your existence. Your sense of self comes from internal consistency rather than external reflection. That creates something rare: psychological solidity, not loud confidence. Quiet groundedness. And because of that, you often feel like an outsider in modern culture. The pace feels artificial. The outrage cycles feel exaggerated. The constant emotional broadcasting feels unnecessary. So you pull back, you observe, you disengage from noise, not because you don't care, but because your nervous system doesn't thrive in chaos. And that's okay. There are many reasons this might resonate with you. Maybe you grew up learning to handle things alone. Maybe you experienced early responsibility. Maybe your values lean toward privacy. Maybe you simply prefer depth over spectacle. None of these paths are wrong. They're just different ways of organizing meaning. Some people extract meaning through spectatorship, watching, reacting, sharing, participating in collective narratives. Others extract meaning for direct engagement, building, maintaining, experiencing quietly. Gen X leans heavily toward the second. You don't need a storyline to feel alive. You just need reality. And here's the deeper insight most people miss. Gen X isn't emotionally detached. It's emotionally economical. You don't spend feelings recklessly. You don't dramatize minor disruptions. You reserve intensity for things that actually matter. This trait developed because you lived through cultural instability without emotional cushioning. Economic recessions, shifting family structures, rapid technological change. So your psyche learned conservation, emotional minimalism. You carry strength quietly. That's why you don't resonate with performative vulnerability. Why motivational hype feels hollow. Why you're skeptical of trends that promise instant transformation. You've seen cycles. You know life doesn't move in hashtags. And here's the late script payoff. Psychologists studying resilience have found that individuals raised with moderate unpredictability often develop higher tolerance for ambiguity and uncertainty later in life. They don't need constant reassurance. They don't panic during transitions. They trust themselves to adapt. That's Gen X energy. You're not emotionally numb. You're emotionally seasoned. You don't chase meaning. You recognize it. And that's powerful in a world addicted to novelty. So if you've ever felt out of place in modern culture, if you've ever wondered why you don't relate to the noise, understand this: you're not missing out on life. You're experiencing it differently. Your nervous system prioritizes stability over stimulation. Your identity is self-anchored. Your attention is selective. That's not a disadvantage. It's a different psychological orientation. This is the kind of quiet human psychology we explore on the Glitch Psychology. If this resonated, you'll probably find more clarity there. And as you move forward, remember this: you don't need to keep up with a world that's sprinting in circles. You don't need to perform depth. You don't need to prove resilience. You already embody it. You're not broken. You're not behind. You're just playing a different game.